So the Chinese Grand Prix was yesterday, and wow, what a thriller that turned out to be. We thought Bahrain was pretty good last week, but the last half of this Grand Prix turned out to be an absolute thriller. So let's go through why. So as we know, qualifying was a bit of a surprise actually, with Mercedes looking pretty nowhere in terms of pace. So Ferrari locking out the front row for the second race in a row, which they hadn't done since 2006, apparently. So those two on the front row, Mercedes on the second row, and Red Bull on the third row of the grid. And at the start, it was Vettel who took the lead into the first corner after cutting off Raikkonen pretty severely, actually. Into the first corner, I felt a bit sorry for Kimi. He got a bit ripped off. He ended up falling down to fourth behind Bottas and Verstappen. And from this point on, really, it looked like the race was probably going to be a bit dull, with Vettel having quite a comfortable lead out in front from Bottas and Verstappen in third. So it kind of stayed like this until the Red Bulls came into pit off the ultra-soft tyres, with Mercedes and Ferrari having got through to Q3 on the soft tyre, which of course in F1, the tyre you use in Q2, if you get into Q3, that is the tyre you start on. And so those that started on the ultra soft at the start were actually kind of compromised. Those such as the two Red Bulls. Grosjean had to give up a place pretty early on to his teammate, and Brendan Hartley as well started on the ultra soft and had a horrendous race. So those guys came into pit, and then Bottas came into pit, and this was quite a decisive moment in the race because Mercedes caught Ferrari napping and performed the undercut on Sebastian Vettel. So Bottas sort of came in as a reaction to the Red Bull, surprisingly, and then Ferrari waited a couple laps and then brought Sebastian Vettel in, and he came out a couple of seconds behind Bottas. So, and we've seen in the past that Ferrari have sometimes bottled it when it comes to strategy. They haven't always been the best, and this was further proof that sometimes their calls are not the best. So it looked like Bottas was going to cruise to a pretty comfortable victory from Vettel and Verstappen, but then the safety car happened, and that sort of threw everything up in the air, didn't it, really? So the safety car was caused by a collision between the two Toro Rossos, with Pierre, now we can fight, Gasly coming together with his teammate Brendan Hartley. Shows really what a difference a week can make in Formula One, with Pierre Gasly probably the standout driver from Bahrain, and now possibly the worst performer at the next round in China qualifying, getting knocked out in Q1 and then crashing into his teammate. We now know that the collision was caused by a miscommunication between the two drivers. They were meant to be swapping position. Hartley was in front of Gasly, and he was meant to let Gasly through as he was on a different strategy, and as Brendan Hartley went a little bit wide into the hairpin at the end of the back straight, Gasly thought he was letting him through, but in fact that was not what was happening, and the end result of that was a collision which left debris scattered all over the track, and that is what resulted in the call of the safety car. And the safety car was called after Bottas and Vettel, the front two, had already passed the pit lane entry, so they were not given the opportunity to come in for fresh tyres, which after the race, Vettel in particular was quite annoyed about this. Hamilton, who was running in third, did have the option to come in, but he chose not to, as Mercedes prioritised track position, and Toto Wolff, after the race, admitted that this was the wrong call. But the ones that did come in were the two Red Bulls of Verstappen and Ricciardo. Red Bull performed two double stacks effectively throughout this race, so it shows that with all the drama that's been happening with pit stops lately and unsafe releases, they still know what they're doing, really. So this made the race incredibly exciting, with the two best overtakers in the field now 4th and 6th, and they were going to have to pass the leaders to potentially end up with a 1-2, and this is what could have happened. Verstappen and Ricciardo both passed Raikkonen with relative ease, but then Verstappen came up to Hamilton, and this is where Verstappen's race started to go quite downhill. As he attempted to stick it around the outside of the fast left-hander at turn 7 in order to get the inside run into turn 8, but no love lost between Lewis and Max, particularly at the moment. So Hamilton forced him out wide. Verstappen had a big snap of opposite lock and ended up going onto the grass and over, just missing his teammate Ricciardo. So a free position for Ricciardo. And this would change the outcome of the race quite significantly, as Ricciardo made one of his trademark dive bombs into the turn 16 at the end of the straight. And watching this man overtake makes me proud to be an Australian, because he is an absolute master on the brakes, and he showed that plenty of times, but particularly with that overtake on Hamilton, which came from absolutely nowhere. He was wasn't really even an overtaking opportunity, and we see this all the time with Ricciardo. I was sitting in front of the TV, I was just waiting for it. It was a beautiful moment. We've seen it before with him with Raikkonen at Monza, and of course his triple overtake at Baku last year, which ultimately got him the win there. So Ricciardo was charging through the field. Verstappen overtook Hamilton properly, and it looked like these two were going to probably both end up on the podium, with Ricciardo also overtaking Vettel down the back straight. And then Verstappen went for an overtake on Vettel, and as we know, that didn't go too well for either of them. So the incident between Verstappen and Vettel was pretty much a repeat of what happened with Gasly and Hartley, with Vettel going a little bit wide and Verstappen seeing that as an opportunity to go down the inside. When Vettel turned down, they made contact and both spun pretty much in a synchronized fashion. And Verstappen has copped a lot of criticism for this since the race, and to be honest, I do think it is deserved. He's the talent of Formula One. He is a potential champion in waiting, but his start to this season has been pretty horrendous. He had a very average race in Melbourne, and he was the one that caused the collision with Hamilton in Bahrain. He forced him off the track and resulted in a DNF for him. And now, in this instance, his impatience cost him a probable win. He was ahead of Ricciardo on the track after the pit stops, and Ricciardo went on to win the race. So if Verstappen, like Ricciardo, had picked his moments, he probably would have won the race. And this is the main issue with Verstappen. He's got the potential. We've seen it, particularly at Brazil in 2016. He can overtake. He's probably as good as Ricciardo, but he needs to learn to pick his moments. And after the race, I think we actually saw that he knows this now. In the past, particularly after Spa and Mexico in 2016, and also after Bahrain this year, Verstappen doesn't like to take responsibility for these things. He seems to deflect it and keep doing what he's doing. But after this race, he's seen pretty apologetic, and he looks like he's going to try and make a bit of a change and learn to pick his moments for overtaking a bit more carefully, because he definitely cost himself a win today. But if he can learn from this and learn from what his teammate accomplished, that'll be the main thing, because he's definitely a champion in waiting. So the collision between Vettel and Verstappen left Vettel down in 7th place after Nico Hülkenberg actually overtook him. Vettel had damage to the side of his car and spun up his rear tyres probably a bit too much in the collision, so he had no pace towards the end of the race. Verstappen landed himself a 10-second time penalty, which would drop him to 5th behind Lewis Hamilton, Lewis Hamilton was extremely lucky to actually gain points on Sebastian Vettel today, because Hamilton, out of that top 6, looked like he was legitimately the slowest out of the top 6 drivers, and that is not something we expect to see from Lewis Hamilton. He has these weekends now and then. He had them a few towards the start of last year, where he's off the pace and he doesn't really seem to know what to do about it, or he just doesn't want to do anything about it. He gets quite moody. He's a bit like a teenager, really. So for him to still come 4th when he probably should have been 6th in this race and to beat Vettel was really a bit of a win for him. But of course, the story out the front was Daniel Ricciardo. So Daniel Ricciardo made a lot of good moves today, but the move of the race was obviously down into turn 6 on Valtteri Bottas, where Bottas, I did feel a bit sorry for Bottas today, because he drove pretty much a perfect race for him. I think he put aside a lot of the criticism that he got after Bahrain, particularly with that move around the outside of Kimi Raikkonen before the safety car, as they left Raikkonen out to back Bottas into Vettel. So I thought that was a great move, and without the safety car, Bottas hands down deserved to win this race, but unfortunately that's not how it turned out for him. And Ricciardo went down the inside at turn 6, and it was great. It was great racing between the two of them. Bottas left him just enough room. It looked like for a minute there that they were going to make contact, but they didn't. Ricciardo moved the race, got through into the lead, and he pretty much controlled it from there. There was no way he was going to lose that race from then on, and he beat Bottas to victory at the Chinese Grand Prix. As you can see, I'm repping Ricciardo. I'm Australian. I was absolutely stoked to see him win that race. I think he's proved that he's worthy of definitely a worthy contract with the likes of Verstappen and Vettel and Hamilton, because he's definitely as good as those guys. He might be a bit like Verstappen's always been hyped up as the sort of the wonder kid, but Ricciardo's just as good, I think. Maybe not quite the talent, but he works hard, and he's the best overtaker in the game at the moment. So Bottas second, Kimi third. I actually felt really sorry for Kimi today. He probably deserved a lot more. I hate it when Kimi Raikkonen, a world champion in his own right, is used to sabotage others' races for the benefit of Vettel. Of course, it turned out that Raikkonen would actually beat Vettel and end up on the podium, but I still felt quite sorry for him as he was left out on a terrible strategy just for the purpose of backing Bottas into Vettel. This was all before the safety car, of course, and without the safety car, Raikkonen would have ended up 6th from starting on the front row. So I hate seeing that stuff, and it makes me worry that if Ricciardo moves to Ferrari for next year, that sort of thing will happen to him. But for Raikkonen to get a podium out of today's, he said he was pretty lucky, as he was looking at a 6th place otherwise. So, not too bad from Raikkonen, but I felt he got a little bit ripped off this weekend. So, behind this top group of the top 5, Verstappen would end up 5th after all that with his 10-second penalty, ahead of Nico Hülkenberg, who's had a pretty superb start to this season. Him and Alonso have proven themselves to be at the top of the midfield so far this year. Both been towards not the higher end of the points, but they've both been the best of the rest so far. He took advantage of the situation with Vettel and Verstappen to get ahead of Vettel, as did Fernando Alonso, who made probably a bit of a rude pass on Vettel, forcing him off the track on the entry to turn 2, but I don't think there's any love lost. Fernando left Ferrari. He could have still been in that seat. So for him to get a 7th place out of starting outside the top 10 again, he hasn't started in the top 10 this year, and he's still 5th or 6th in the championship, which is pretty mental. Vettel came home 8th, just beating Carlos Sainz, who has been one of the surprises this year, actually. I thought the battle between him and Hülkenberg would be really close, but it hasn't turned out to be that way so far, with Hülkenberg having 22 points compared to Carlos's 3. So Carlos needs to lift his game, especially if there is a spot at Red Bull at the end of this year, and Kevin Magnussen claimed the final point for Haas ahead of the 2 Force Indias, who were probably expecting better, particularly Perez, who started in the top 10. And behind them, it was the 2 Williams. Lance Stroll actually got a pretty superb start to end up 12th after the first lap, but as we've seen, the Williams have no pace, and then it was ahead of the Saubers and the Toro Rossos. So that's pretty much been my wrap-up of the Chinese Grand Prix. It was a pretty mental race, and if we can have more races like this throughout the year, we're in for a pretty exciting season. Obviously, the safety car was a big factor in why the race ended up being a classic, but that's racing. Daniel Ricciardo for the win. What a man, what an Australian. I will be covering the next race in Baku, and until then, I will catch you later.